is part of the FranCamp Live series. And Frank, I'm glad you're with us. Frank Robinson, Nick Powles. And guys, this is all about expansion and growth. Although the title, What Franchisors Get Wrong About Franchise Growth, we're going to talk to Frank Robinson, our neighbor from the north in Canada. We're going to talk about franchise brands expanding from the U.S. market into Canada, Canadian brands coming here, and most important, commonalities. What's the right formula for growth and what are mistakes to avoid? So, Frank, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited that you're going to be coming to New Jersey for FranCamp in June.
I'm very excited about that and even more excited to be on your program here today. Thanks for inviting me. You talked about the commonalities between Canada and the United States. I think it's the perfect time and opportunity to focus on that. You know, there's a lot of news out there about differences between our two countries and things that at times have been pulling us apart, but there's plenty of room and opportunity to continue to focus on our similarities, our commonalities, and the way we can build bridges and help our franchise clients on both sides of the border. So thanks for inviting me to do that today.
That's a very proper Canadian statement. I look at it as like two brothers just fighting, having a little argument, Frank.
Well, I have two brothers myself and three sons, so I'm fully aware of that dynamic. That's for sure.
I'm going to kick this off because legal component is a key part. But beyond that, you work with brands, in Canada, into the United States. For everyone that's going to be attending FranCamp, what are some of the commonalities that you see, Frank, on when you're looking at a client brand and you're like, you know what, they're getting it right. They're going to scale the right way. And then, of course, what are some of those legal pitfalls and things that U.S. brands need to be aware of when we enter the Canadian market?
Yeah, that's great. And, we can kind of continue to focus on the similarities, and there are a lot. So for any emerging or new franchise system that's, looking over the border and thinking about Canadian as an expansion market, you want to do a number of things that you would have done at the outstart in the U.S. So first of all, protecting your intellectual property. Your trademark rights in the United States end at the border. They're on a country by country basis. Yeah. So if you have a unique brand and image, that's something you need to start thinking about protecting in the Canadian market and any international market for that matter immediately. It can take a year or two and sometimes longer to pass that through the registration process. And so you want to get a lot of lead time on that. That's something to be thinking about immediately. And I would say that to a franchisor that wants to come into Canada or go internationally tomorrow, next year, or even has no plans. Because what you do by registering your trademarks in a foreign market is you put your foot in the door, you lock up that market. And if you ever go to sell your franchise system to someone that's looking, as they often do, to take your system to the next level, telling them that Canada or Australia or the UK or whatever is ready to go, it's available to you because I've already protected my trademarks, will multiply your investment in that trademark protection by a great number. So that's something to think about immediately, is the trademark piece. Canada, just really briefly, without going too far down the legal rabbit hole, does have franchise laws very similar to the U.S. You have to provide a disclosure document and wait 14 days before you sign anything or take any money. That's in 7 out of the 10 provinces in Canada. The FDD is very similar to how it looks and feels in the U.S., but it needs to be adapted and modified and worked on by a Canadian attorney. So that's something else we often will help clients do, is to take their U.S. document, and I like to call it Canadianize the document. And in doing that, it's not just adapting the words and the concepts. You really have to think about the way your business is going to be applied and run in a foreign market. So those will go to things that are reflected in the FDD, but are really things that are on the ground and in real time business considerations. So, for example, what does it cost to build your clinic or your studio or your retail or a restaurant location? And the costs are going to be different in Canada because, we're in a different country. We have a different currency. We have a different economics, different market factors that are going to go into that. So that's just one example of things that need to be thought through in a particular way and how they're going to change in the local market that will be reflected into the disclosure document. I could go on much beyond that. I'm sure you have other questions you want to ask of me or different points to discuss today.
Let me make some comments, and I just want your response on it. I have two main categories. One is, I'm glad you just talked about the trademark. If I took every brand that franchised their business in the United States in the last 12 months, I would bet you less than 1% have thought about an international trademark. And what's interesting is that should be a part of the initial investment. If you're a business and you want to grow, as simple as Canada, maybe you go further international, but it seems like, why would you not protect the IP? We worked for a long time. Actually ended up working with both brands, but Topper's Pizza Canada and Topper's Pizza US. And Topper's Pizza US, even though the big one was based out of Wisconsin, there was also Topper's Pizza Canada, Topper's Pizza California. And so I say that because what that does is it puts limitations on where you can go. So I think it's a tremendous insight, and frankly, I think it needs to be talked about and invested in as a part of setting up the construct of a good franchise business.
Let me just say, to jump on that, because when you talk to a Canadian, they're immediately thinking about protecting their trademarks in the United States, because the United States is the holy grail. It's like it's the big show. So when you start smaller, or you conquer the Canadian market, you're always looking over the fence to the US. I want to get there. That's where I'm going to make it big. I think the Americans don't necessarily have the same mindset. They're looking about crushing it domestically, and then they'll think about going international. But if you really want to build a global business, and some people don't, they have smaller expectations. But if you really want to think about going international, and that's your goal from the beginning, you need to take the steps to do that immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the show Silicon Valley. Like, they're creating these great business ideas in the US, and there's a guy that, like, I'll go start this in Japan, and he just got the trademark and called it like 1 degree separate. But it's like that has to be protected. I love the return volley that Canadian brands are thinking about this. The other thing that I'm interested in, like, for a while, our business looked at how do we expand into Canada. And we got a little bit of room because we were working with Pita-Pit on both sides of Canada and the US. So we had an avatar of a client. What was interesting, we kept on butting up against, as a US brand, unless we had a Canadian office, Canadian brands were reluctant to work with us. And it was an interesting insight. And if I look at our clients who have failed to hit their expansion marks in Canada, one is, do they have a presence there, period? And if they don't, it seems a lot harder to grow. And secondly, like, understanding the lay of the land, that in Quebec, if you don't speak French, or they don't even allow students to learn English in class, it's only French. Well, that's an insight for an American brand to say, we're going to go to Quebec. If you don't understand the lay of the land, you're almost automatically rejected. So I think it's harder for a U.S. brand to break into Canada based on those insights. Any opinions on that?
Oh, I have strong opinions on that. And I think what you're getting at are, like, there's different ways you can think about that. So for a U.S. brand that wants to just kind of, go fishing from the United States, by that I mean, stand on the U.S. side and just throw your rod over the border and try to pick up franchisees like that. That can be very difficult. And that's for a number of different reasons. First of all, the psychological element you just mentioned. When a franchisee sees that its franchisor is not in the country, that they're selling a franchise and trying to support you and work on marketing programs and system optimization from California, and you're in Alberta, the thought in your mind is, well, I'm actually in this on my own. You don't actually get it. You're not here. You're not helping me. You're not actually by my shoulder. You don't know what the Canadian market looks like. So I think over time, unless you really are delivering on your brand promise and the systems that you offer franchisees, there's a really quick mind change for the franchisee to feel like they've been abandoned or left alone, and they're not really being supported in the way the franchisor promised them. The flip side of that is, if you are in the market, if you do have a branch or an office and you have people on the ground in that market, the flip side is true. I think the franchisees will understand, yes, you're an American brand, but you have invested in this market. You're here with me. You're doing this with me. And I think that goes a very long way on the psychological element. The other way to look at it, and there's still more, is functionally and practically. How could you actually know what the Canadian market looks like? How do you know how it operates? How do you know those nuances? How do you pick up that 2 or 3% improvement if you are in California and you're not here in Canada, actually working the system, meeting the suppliers, meeting landlords, pounding the pavement, being in your franchisees' faces in the way that we all know proper, diligent, successful franchisors do. And so you will lose those benefits that your competitors have by being in the market if you're not actually here. And I want to like really double down on that supply piece. So this is even more important today than it ever has been in this very crazy world we live in, where we have inflationary pressures all over the place. We have trade complications between our countries with ever-changing tariffs and things like that. We have a lot of pressure on retail and franchise businesses. If you're a franchise system in the United States and you're relying on a supply chain or a supply system that is originated in the United States or based on a supply chain that is modeled on an American process, I'm not going to say that's not going to work, because it could, but there's a lot more room for that to go wrong. And especially in a situation like in the restaurant business where margins are so thin, if your supply chain is not optimized, if it's not actually properly set up to work in Canada, you're going to lose. And so that's another thing I think that people miss by not being in market, is really working through supply chain and suppliers and figuring that whole piece out.
And I don't want to take us backwards, but before I go to the next question, guys, if as a franchise brand, there's nothing more depressing than seeing success in the US market. You want to enter the Canadian market, and we hit that first stumbling block of getting your trademark protected in Canada is much more complex, and you may have lost the rights. So even if you're not planning on Canadian expansion, I would apply for a trademark in Canada. And it's not as simple and straightforward as it is in the US.
Charles,
Frank,
are just out of curiosity, are you advising brands beyond Canada? Because what Frank just said, like UK, Asia, like if you're franchising, you do have dreams of what does a 1,000-unit brand look like. You don't have dreams of what does a 10-unit brand look like.
Yeah, look, good brands are going to do that, and we'll maintain portfolios internationally. But when you're dealing with emerging brands, many of them are not going to take that step. But when you explain, when you see the proximity to Canada and how critical it could be, it's a much easier sell for me to say at least do Canada right now. Right. Yeah. And I think it's critical. But, we have a ton of deals in Middle East and whatnot. So the answer is do all the above, Nick. But if you're going to do anything at a minimum, at least do Canada out of the gate.
Wait, answer this just for a brand watching. So take the Middle East is a great example. You exhibit at the New York Franchise Expo. Someone comes over and says, I'm going to take this brand here. Well, now you have a candidate that's appeared, but you're not structurally ready for this. How much time beyond this? Let's say someone comes from Canada at the New York Expo and says, I want to take this to Canada. How much time will it take from that point to when you're actually official and ready to go?
That's a question.
That's for Frank, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, it could be any form.
Well, here's the key: if it's a U.S.-based franchisor and they're working with a strong legal team in Canada, like Frank, the answer is they're going to get our U.S. FDD. And how long does that take, Frank, to get up and running?
You could do it in a matter, like if everyone's racing towards the finish line and there's a deal to be done, you could do that in 4 or 6 weeks.
And that's including trademark?
Well, as I mentioned, I could help you get a trademark applied for tomorrow. But then it takes a long time to sort of snake its way through the system. It has to wait in the queue and then get reviewed. That could take a year or more, but getting the application through is a very good first step. And you can start franchising in Canada immediately upon only getting that application.
So stay on that for a second, Frank. So let's say that my brand, we get a candidate, we want to rush this. You can get us legal. And then flash forward a year from now, we get rejected on the trademark and the franchisee is pissed. Like, what did that happen?
It could. So the one thing you'll always hear a lawyer say is they don't have a crystal ball. We love saying that, and that's the truth. But there is something very close to that in the trademark world. So what we would do is do something called a pre-clearance search. So that we would order a whole bunch of information from a third-party service that collects all this data from outside in the world to determine whether or not there's a risk of that happening. So I'll look at competing brands, business name registrations, stuff on the internet, social media, to see if there's someone else there that could challenge you or get in the way. And then we would do an assessment to tell you, we think that's 30% likely, 60%, 90%. Or we would say, if you modify your trademark in this way, we're going to be able to avoid that risk that's down the road. So we would be able to sort of moderate our approach depending on how smart we can get about what may come your way. The other thing we can do is we usually would modify the franchise offering to make it very clear what we've learned, right? So then you put a little bit of the risk back on the franchisee if you're prepared to do that, or you accept more of the risk as the brand if you're willing to do that. So it's all about understanding what that risk looks like, allocating it between the parties, and then taking having enough foresight to manage that.
I mean, it seems like to me, and Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, like to engage for that assessment, I have Nick's Handyman Services. I'm like, I'm going to go franchise this. Like, it seems like if you're not willing to pay the amount of money that it's going to take to get the trademark all the way through, to pay for an assessment, to know before I go through the work to trademark in the US, seems like that would be like responsible business, right?
I wouldn't really advise a client ever to do anything other than that. If you're going to start awarding franchises to people without any understanding or ability to anticipate what the risk may be as you build your business, you're missing the point. And that's a legal issue, that's a business issue, that's an economic issue. If you run into a problem, you have your franchisees are going to hate your guts. They're going to probably have to rebrand, so there's money lost there. It's going to slow down your momentum and growth. It kills all the brand goodwill and equity you've built. So, I mean, you're going to save a couple $1,000s to roll the dice on all that. It just doesn't make any sense.
From a non-legal perspective, right? It's interesting as an attorney, we watch our clients go through different growth cycles, startup expansion, unexpected detours and road bumps. What's some of the takeaways you're learning or observing over the years as to what franchise brands are doing right when they win and some of the mistakes they're making, and not necessarily legally, but just in general?
Yeah. I think the number one thing that I would say is not giving it enough thought and respect that you are actually leaving the United States and entering a new country. You get lulled into this sense of comfort and familiarity because Canada is so close and so similar, both in the way the legal structure works and the way consumers behave and the types of goods and services that are bought and sold in the marketplace. It feels and looks and is close enough to the United States that you can feel like, dare I say it, it's the 51st state. And people will treat it that way and not give it the type of respect that I think it deserves, because there are so many differences in Canada. And, you know, as they say, the devil is in the details, and it's the nuances that are different. All the broad strokes are similar. But if you really want to win, you have to focus on the small wins and add those up over time. And that's what's going to get you ahead of your competitors. And so it's things like understanding like what a consumer really wants, how to speak to the consumer, how to market to that consumer. I'm going to say again, the supply chain and the whole supplier network is really important. I do believe, go back to what we said before, and just to underline it, being in this market, learning this market, and being in here, being in the Canadian marketplace to support your franchisees is really important for all the reasons I said before. And so it's the ones who don't do any of those things. It's the ones who go fishing for the United States, who just say, you know what, we were never going to go to Canada anyways, or the phone rang, so we might as well just try this Canada thing. Let's just give it a shot. We'll do a Hail Mary, or we'll just throw a bit of resources at this. If it sticks, it'll stick, and then we'll run with it. And we'll see if that works. And then, you know, we'll get a little momentum, and then we'll push the thing down the hill, and it'll start rolling. Well, that's not a very good way to do it. The ones that succeed the most are the ones that are, they push into the market instead of being pulled in, right? So you can be pulled in by a franchisee who says, come to Canada. I like your brand, and let's do this together. And you just get sort of dragged into the market. Or you can stand at the border and say, I want to go into Canada. You push in with all the resources behind you and all the homework having been done. And you do it in a deliberate, fully resourced, capitalized, and committed way. And that's the way you're going to succeed.
I want to be clear to all the ICE agents watching right now. Frank is not saying cross the border illegally and push people in. He's saying do it responsibly. So just making sure everybody's clear on that.
Thanks. As a Canadian, I wasn't quite attuned to that, but I do appreciate you having my back like that.
So, like, there's responsible franchising, which is set up infrastructure, whether it's a Canadian brand coming to the U.S. or a U.S. brand. Canada. Set up infrastructure, hire some people there, start having the groundwork. The reality is, of all the brands that franchised in last year, maybe that 1% is going to have the financial resources to do that. Like franchising at the beginning stages ends up being so bootstrapped. So that's probably the biggest challenge. And I do think the bullshit side of franchising is exactly what you just said. Is when you do it irresponsibly, you're like, maybe we'll a Canadian brand is like, maybe we'll go into the US and see what happens, or vice versa. Maybe see what happens is messing with someone's life savings that is investing in your business. And that's the bigger risk in this. And there's a responsible way to do it. There's a cost that, like, you have to make sure it's cost effective for what your business can sustain.
Yes.
Too.
Well, I think there's an answer to that. And that is finding, and it's a challenge for every franchisor, but finding the right franchisees and structuring your deals the right way. So you can do that by selling, the traditional way of selling one franchise at a time. But you can also, and many more people are starting to do this, is to award territory rights, master rights. And I'm not suggesting that master franchising in Canada is a new thing. It's not at all. But given the fact that I just said it's really important to be in the market, if you can't be in the market as a franchisor, maybe you're better off thinking about awarding a significant franchise right, a multi-unit, like I said, a development right or a master right to someone who is in the market, a sophisticated, capitalized operator who can bite off a big piece of the business, and they have the supply chain here, they have the infrastructure, they have the personnel, they have the capital, the landlord relationships that you don't have because you are. I'm just going to keep picking on California because you're in California, but these people are in the market. So I would say historically, those types of operators were few and far between in Canada, but they seem to be growing in Canada. There seem to be more, I'd say, operating companies, multi-unit, multi-brand franchise operators. We don't quite have the same volume of private equity-backed franchisee groups like you do in the United States, although that is starting to emerge. But there are more options in terms of finding good quality capitalized franchisees that can take off a decent sized development obligation and be in the market for you, which is what you want the franchisee to. That's why anyone franchises, to ask the franchisee to do the things you can't do because you're not there. And so, that's certainly an option and a way to kind of get around some of that.
Yeah. If I connect some dots, right? Carlos's question, independent of international expansion, what core challenges typically hinder growth of emerging brands? If I could start this off, but, leading off with your point of view on franchisees, and for Carlos, to me, for the emerging brands, it seems like the most critical issue is the step that I think so many overlook, which is that foundation setting phase when they become a franchisor. They become a franchisor, and too many, I think, are missing the seasoning foundational stage of, I just became a franchisor, but I need to keep improving systems. I need to keep improving my website. I need to keep improving my sales discovery process. And my most important task is onboarding those 2 or 3 pioneering franchisees and building around them. And I think so many emerging brands skip that.
Yeah.
Or they jump ahead, whether it's sales organizations and other sales tactics, and they keep running, but they've never built the validation base. And I'm curious what you guys think about that.
Yeah. I mean, I see, and I'm sure you do too, just as much as I do. There's like certain plateaus in the growth phases of a franchise system. You're at the beginning, you're bootstrapping and you're desperate to make your first, 5 or 10 franchise sales, and you'll do just about anything to do that. But each time you do that, you move from 10 to 20 to 50 to 100. There's a reinvestment phase to get you over the hump and get you over that plateau where you need to get more sophisticated. You need to bring on new people, smart, good, qualified, expensive people to help you grow that system. And often at those junctures, at those intersections, some franchisors are reluctant to give away control or to reinvest the capital. They finally have some money in the bank after bootstrapping for so long. I sold 10 franchises and there's some royalty coming at me. I want that money in my bank account. I don't want to spend it. So there's a reluctance to put the money back in the business. There's a reluctance to hand over control. And you need to keep doing that at each one of those intervals to keep moving up the food chain. And I find there's a reluctance to do that. And it's human nature. It's understandable. Most of these brands are built by someone at their kitchen table. It's their baby. It's their livelihood. It's their family business. Letting go of that is hard. But I find that those different junctures, and each one requires a different type of investment, scale of investment. But I do see that franchisors, for a very good reason, are reluctant to do that.
I think that's
in 2008, when the economy in the United States was shot, brands used master franchising as a way to keep the lights on. And it's interesting because so many of them were announcing big, giant international deals, taking in $250,000, using that cash not to build infrastructure to support international business, only use the cash to support their internal business. I think that's where it goes south. If it's not done in a productive way, it's everything that we're talking about. Without the right infrastructure around it, then it turns into money grabs, and money grabs don't create sustainability and doesn't increase the valuation when you go to exit. So that's why Canada is the pathway of least resistance, because of the proximity to the United States, but that doesn't mean you can't go into it without having the right infrastructure.
Yep. We often call it international light. It's like the low-hanging fruit of international. And so that makes it easy. It makes it accessible. I shouldn't say easy. It makes it accessible, and it makes it the obvious choice. But like I said at the beginning, it sometimes will lull you into this feeling of, oh, it's just Canada. It's just Canada. So we don't have to do anything that unique for it. And that's where you will trip.
well,
It must suck to like grow up your whole life just feeling like we think you're just Canada. Like that sucks.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm used to it at this point. We
Yeah.
know what we're worth.
But to be fair, like if I'm observing what I see, like Charles's wall is like brick and yours is like fancy ass marble. So we know that Canadian lawyers make a lot more money than US lawyers.
How do you know that's not fake?
That's correct.
I did choose the nicest boardroom in my office, though, because I wanted to impress you folks.
That's good. That's good.
Well, you did. And I got to say, our Canadian clients, they're very methodical and very precise. Frank, I'm excited that you're going to be joining us at FranCamp in June. And for Carlos, everyone on here, at FranCamp, I mean, you're going to meet Frank, a ton of other great people in the community, but we're really going to, and Frank, I think it works for every business. We're going to be peeling back on the opportunity with AI, really how brands, law firms, businesses need to be refocusing their brand strategy. And with the challenge of AI comes a big opportunity. So it's going to be a lot of good stuff. Looking forward for you to being in our home market. And I appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to being with you guys and all the great guests that are going to be there. It'll be my first time. And I'm really interested in that subject matter. How could you not be? It's all over the place. And we all need to get smarter on how to use AI and how to manage that. I know I'm doing that every day in my business. Our clients now expect us to use advanced technology in the way we deliver our services. So we're continuing to adapt and adopt those things. And at the same time, learning how our clients are doing the same thing, making sure we can speak their language and be on the cutting edge with them. So lots to learn. I think the great thing is we're all learning it together. You know, sometimes you show up these things and there's the senior person who's been saying the same thing for 30 years, but we're all kind of doing this all together, which makes it exciting and fascinating, and everyone has something to share about it. So I'll be happy to do that and get involved with that with the group.
Frank, look forward to it. And everyone who joined us, check out FranCamp and have a great afternoon.
Thanks for having me.